If you don't like it, make your own is a pretty poor comeback in any argument, but especially when it comes to developing games. However, some things do feel easy when you're cheesed off, or at least seem more worthwhile doing, as a giant middle finger to the people who talk down to you or otherwise stood in your way. I'm Sai for WhatCulture.com, and these are 10 video game studios probably founded out of spite. Number 10. ARTPLAY. Koji Igarashi is a name synonymous with Castlevania. Having worked at Konami since he left college, Igarashi's first time contributing to the IP was hugely important for his career and for the franchise. Midway through development of Castlevania Symphony of the Night, Igarashi was promoted to assistant director. The finished product is often called the best title in the series and is unanimously praised for refreshing its playstyle. In fact, so much so that the term Igarashi-vania refers to any Castlevania game made in this grand explorative RPG adjacent style. After over 30 years at Konami, Igarashi left as the company took a turn into developing mobile games and had little use for a man of his talent. Later that year, he became a co-founder of ARTPLAY. A collaboration between Chinese and Japanese developers, ARTPLAY's first major game was exactly what it needed to be. Sure, it didn't have the same title or the same universe, but Bloodstained Ritual of the Night was a through-and-through spiritual successor to Symphony of the Night and all of its sequels. To further prove that Igarashi's presence was still desired in the industry, Bloodstained was crowdfunded as one of the most successful video games ever on the Kickstarter platform. Number 9. Striking Distance Studios. Dead Space is an all-time classic of the survival horror genre, which is why it's getting a remake, but its director Glenn Schofield won't be returning to help bring it to life. Schofield on June 20th, 2010 tweeted, "Wow, a year ago today I left EA. What a day that was. They really treated me like shit, even after creating Dead Space for them." Responding to the furore, Schofield followed it up with, "After a year of EA bashing us, it's good to get it off my chest." This perhaps refers to Dead Space 2's release statement that, after Schofield had said they would struggle to make the game without him, read, "The team at Visceral Studios faced down adversity and never got sucked into petty competition. Their answer was simple, they just made a better game." Schofield, following his exit from EA, went on to co-found Sledgehammer Games and worked on the Call of Duty series for about a decade. That being said, his second startup is what matters the most. Striking Distance Studios are gearing up to put out their first game. It's not exactly groundbreaking to say that the Callisto protocol has got a lot in common with Schofield's previous work from a visual perspective, showing that the director still has feelings for the sci-fi horror aesthetic, just like the hungry Dead Space fanbase. Number 8. Absurd Venture Studios. Dan Houser has always been a very private person, so we don't know exactly what led to his stepping away from Rockstar in March 2020. You'd be forgiven for assuming he finally decided that his Scrooge McDuck style pile of money was big enough, but after leaving Rockstar, Houser announced less than a year later that he had founded Absurd Venture Studios. If you've ever wondered where the Grand Theft Auto titles ever got their personality, a lot of it is down to Houser, who has worked as a writer on almost every single game in the series. Grand Theft Auto 5 is now over a decade old, and in that time you have to wonder how itchy Houser's creative brain must have gotten, considering the only game that Rockstar have put out since has been Red Dead Redemption 2. With the ongoing churn of cash that GTA Online produced for 10 years, there was no need to rush to craft a new mainline experience, and thus Houser's writing talents were largely unneeded for most of that time. Absurd Venture is an interesting name for a studio and perhaps speaks to the fact that Houser could very easily retire if he wanted to, but feels the need to create. We're working on assumption here, but it's very likely that that's where Houser's decision to leave Rockstar comes into play. Number 7. Kojima Productions. The feud of the people versus the wrongful imprisonment of Hideo Kojima at the hands of Konami is one of the gaming industry's most long-winded stories. The company and Metal Gear Solid director Kojima constantly clashed over the years. He was given his own studio within Konami for a time, but when Kojima Productions folded in July 2015, he was reportedly blocked from attending the Game Awards at the whims of his former employer. Kojima Productions only stayed dormant for a few months, however, as it was revealed in December of the same year that it was being reformed as an independent studio in collaboration with Sony. In 2019, the studio released Death Stranding, which was an indication in a lot of ways that Kojima was completely off the leash. Whilst Metal Gear had been a very experimental series, Death Stranding is by far the auteur's biggest accomplishment in pushing boundaries gameplay-wise and from a storytelling perspective. Regardless of whatever you think of the end result, it has to be commended for being pretty out there. Whilst Kojima hasn't really made a whole lot of potshots at Konami, he never really needed to, as we all knew the situation from afar. The massive sales success that was Death Stranding was the only message he needed to send. Number 6. Humanoid Studios. Casey Hudson worked as director on all 3 Mass Effect games, and by the time of the trilogy's conclusion it seemed like he was pretty burnt out on the whole thing and looking for a new venture. Bouncing from BioWare to Microsoft directly, Hudson got to work in a new role whilst the company he left behind began to struggle. Mass Effect Andromeda, crafted without him, released to very mixed reactions. He then unexpectedly returned to BioWare as a general manager after 2 years away, but departed once more 3 years later, saying it was to make way for the next generation of leaders. Announcing the formation of a new studio in the summer of 2021, Humanoid's first release is still an unknown amount of time away from its reveal, but we have at least been teased with some concept art. Hudson has said of the title, "Our current project is a multi-format AAA game focusing on character-driven narrative in an all-new science fiction universe." Hudson leaving BioWare during the production of Andromeda and during the production of the franchise's next game is very suspicious and concerning. He may be professional and courteous, but both visually and intent we are getting a big whiff of "I'll make my own Mass Effect" from our first look at his future. Number 5. COMCEPT/INTERCEPT. Keiji Inafune is fondly remembered as the father of the Mega Man series, which was so important to Capcom that, for a long time, the character was basically the company mascot. Inafune was clearly not happy when he left Capcom in 2010, talking online regarding his concerns about issues within the Japanese gaming industry. He looked at the state of gaming and felt that not only had the Western world caught up, but in fact left Japanese developers in the dust. He wanted to innovate the way that games were made, and so, in order to try and make a difference, founded his own studio, COMCEPT. COMCEPT was to be the production wing for new Japanese IPs that Inafune wanted to support, and in order to create games in-house, he also founded INTERCEPT. It's not really all gone to plan, however, as most of the company's projects have either been Japanese exclusive and or largely been released to pretty ghastly reactions. The crowd-funded Mega Man successor, Mighty No. 9, is a prime example of COMCEPT's divisive work. Inafune founded his businesses to try and change the industry, to swing back at major corporations with huge budgets and big teams. Unfortunately for him, so far COMCEPT and INTERCEPT's outputs have made his David and Goliath story a rather uneven fight. Number 4. Microsoft Game Studios. Up to a certain point, the perception of video game consoles and PCs were entirely different things. Whilst your Nintendo or PlayStation was impressive, it was only playing video games, whereas your desktop personal computer ran the high-end Windows 98 and could do so much more. The PlayStation 2 was a major step in crafting a home video game system that was more than just a sophisticated kid's toy in the eyes of parents, by including audio CD and, importantly, DVD support. Microsoft started to sweat about the possibility of the market demographic of gaming widening so vastly in scope and the reality of being left behind. Bill Gates felt threatened, and thus the pathway to the release of the original Xbox was laid ahead of the Microsoft team. Technically speaking, a team already existed known as Microsoft Games Group, but this was a whole other ballgame. Rebranding the studio made sure the world knew they were serious. They immediately got to work crafting a launch lineup to compete with the PlayStation 2 under the moniker of Microsoft Game Studios, now known as Xbox Game Studios. You could say that they were reacting out of concern, but it's pretty spiteful to try and stop your contemporary from succeeding by creating an entire console to compete. Number 3. Playtonic Games. Rareware was once one of the most trustworthy companies that any gamer could possibly support. You knew that Rare meant quality, and for several years working alongside Nintendo, their games were the kind of things that sold systems. Donkey Kong Country, GoldenEye, Banjo-Kazooie, the list goes on. The Microsoft acquisition of Rare in 2002 was rather overdramatically seen as the end of the studio, with Nintendo fans mourning the loss. Certainly it can be said that Rare's quality since developing for Xbox has been inconsistent at best, and being pulled away from the IPs that everyone knew them for, in particular Banjo-Kazooie, to work on Kinect games was a very concerning prospect. In 2014 it was confirmed that people on the inside had felt very similarly, as half a dozen Rare employees announced that they had left their respective roles and formed a new studio in an attempt to bring that Rare magic back once more. Playtonic took to Kickstarter to reveal and fund their first game, Yooka-Laylee, which was a love letter to fans of Banjo-Kazooie and the 3D platforming genre. Never a company short of sense of humour, Yooka-Laylee's runtime is packed with little nods to Rare's history, and some suspect that the money-hungry villain capital B's need to suck up books is perhaps an allusion to Microsoft's ill-gotten purchase of Rare. Number 2. Infinity Ward. A wonderful culmination of events brought Medal of Honor Allied Assault to life. Steven Spielberg, off the back of Saving Private Ryan, was interested in writing for a video game, and the Medal of Honor series had two very successful World War themed FPS titles already. EA sought out a developer, and with their first choice of id Software being hard at work on Doom 3, they were recommended 2015 games. Allied Assault won all kinds of awards upon release and was regarded by most as the best Medal of Honor entry to that point. You'd think that publisher EA would be excited to continue that collaboration, but 2015 games felt very differently. Unhappy with EA's contracts for Allied Assault, several of 2015 games' employees began to look elsewhere. Thankfully, developers Vince Zampella, Grant Coulier and Jason West had the review scores of their latest masterpiece to point to sell themselves. They knocked on the right door, as Activision CEO Bobby Kotick was no stranger to investing in potential success. The group became Infinity Ward and got right to work on becoming a competitor for the series they had just worked on. Activision's hands-off approach was an inviting offer to even more of 2015's ranks, and several more made the jump to join the development team for the original Call of Duty. Number 1. Respawn Entertainment. Following the success of Call of Duty 4 Modern Warfare, Infinity Ward devs Vince Zampella and Jason West requested a renegotiation in terms with Activision. Aside from some bigger bonuses, they also wanted creative control of the Call of Duty series. Their bosses signed off on this on the condition that if the two were fired, then ownership would revert back to Activision. How they didn't see all this coming with an agreement like that, we'll never know. The partnership exploded in 2010. West and Zampella have said that the company tried their best to make excuses to fire them over that time, one of which included accusing them of conspiring with industry rivals and previous employers Electronic Arts. There were legal battles that were ultimately settled out of court. The two developers went on to found Respawn Entertainment pretty soon after. 48 members of the Infinity War team were either also terminated or resigned following the controversy, 36 of which joined their old colleagues at Respawn. In June 2013, the team revealed their new IP, Titanfall. In the company's first decade, they've worked on original property and, ironically, developed 2020's Medal of Honor Above and Beyond, because time is just a flat circle. And that's the list. Let us know what you thought of this video down in the comments below, and any other video game studios you can think of that were founded out of spite. Make sure you like this video, share it with your friends, subscribe for more, and hit the notification bell. I've been Cy for WhatCulture, and have a good week.